I don't know what we're gonna find, but getting there is the only way we'll ever know.
A post-apocalyptic movie where a small group of survivors trek across the country in their custom RV where they face off against insects, storms and other survivors.
This is it. This is how things are gonna be.
Damnation Alley.
All those explosions, they knocked the world off its axis.
Damnation Alley is a 1977 film set in a post-nuclear world where there are all sorts of deadly mutant creatures, angry survivors, and the Earth has tilted on its axis, which causes all sorts of weird atmospheric effects. Jan Michael Vincent and George Peppard drive around in an all-terrain RV on the way to Albany, New York.
Albany's the place to aim for.
So this is a 1977 science fiction film from 20th Century Fox. Well, this is the other 1977 science fiction film from Fox, one that the studio had originally thought would be the bigger of the two sci-fi films.
I don't know what it is.
Damnation Alley was rather loosely based on a novel by Roger Zelazny, and likewise the final cut is based rather loosely on the director's original cut, which ran much longer than the released version's rather tight 90-minute runtime. The film begins at a remote desert Air Force missile base, with Major Denton telling his colleague Lieutenant Jake Tanner that he wants to change shifts to get a less casual partner. More or less at the same time, it looks like an actual nuclear war has broken out. Shit. I've always been taught to find the silver lining, but that's not really possible in a mushroom cloud.
Sorry, darling, but this is where you get off.
A couple of years later and things at the base are ticking along. Having resigned from the Air Force, Jake and his buddy, artist and former Sergeant Keegan, are living it up in one of the base's outer buildings, while Denton, also known as Sam, is working on his own secret project with Lieutenant Perry.
You son of a...
Hey, what are you worried about? Keegan, there's nothing you can do for her.
All four are the only survivors after the underground base blows up in a stock footage frenzy.
Poor bastards. Maybe they're better off out of it.
The secret project of Sam's, a pair of impressive all-terrain vehicles called Landmasters, and the foursome head off to investigate the only radio signal they've heard in 2 years. It's in Albany in New York. The post-nuclear radiation is such that there's a very narrow corridor that the vehicles can safely traverse.
Damnation Alley is nearly 100 miles wide a lot of the way.
Damnation Alley, who named it that?
I did.
So if the safe area is called Damnation Alley, what the hell is the bit outside called? The insta-kill shit zone?
Pretty good, wasn't it?
Pretty good, pretty lucky, and pretty stupid.
Tanner and Sam Denton's long-standing antipathy towards each other sees them snipe along the way, but very quickly the second vehicle is caught in a storm and overturns, killing Perry and wounding Keegan. Now reduced to one vehicle, the group heads off to Las Vegas, where they start playing slot machines and meet aspiring musician Janice, who joins their trek. In between stops, we sometimes get a short travelling montage of the Landmaster driving in the desert, or maybe we see shots of the crew resting or reading, bathing, and perhaps in deleted scenes, a few sessions of an unsuccessful Dungeons & Dragons campaign. But there are lots of storms. I mean, there's always another storm. The next stop is Salt Lake City, where they're attacked by hordes of giant killer cockroaches, where Keegan is killed.
Killer cockroaches. Repeat. Killer cockroaches.
No kidding.
And then they meet a young orphan, Billy, who of course is a crack shot with a rock,
Son of a...
which will be handy at their next stop.
All the dead are dead, and all the living are dying.
When they meet some creepy mountain men, who of course have lined up a ticketing system over who's going to have their way with Janice and in what order.
You're just doing it in the wrong order.
Only to find that the Landmaster can mete out some righteous justice. The Landmaster needs some spares, so the group stop off at a junkyard in Detroit and hunker down before another massive storm envelops them, and then there's a flood and something's happening to the Earth, which is implied to be the planet's axis returning to its original alignment. Sometimes in the rainy season around here, we can get a lot of potholes in the roads, which if you hit with your car, plays havoc with the wheel alignment. I would pay good money for a car that can realign its own wheels, just so I can stop giving money to my mechanic, Moneybags Q Goldteeth Jr. After riding out the flood, the Landmaster is within spitting distance of the signal from Albany, which turns out to be a colony of survivors who will receive Tanner and Billy as a scout party. Denton's parting shot, one last passive-aggressive dig at Tanner.
Please don't take him as an example of the rest of our party.
The end. That seemed like it had a lot of promise in the concept, but sort of ends up as a post-apocalyptic version of National Lampoon's Vacation, with fewer Chevy Chasers. It seemed like there was just so much more that could have been done with this setup, and we ended up with the bare minimum number of scenes needed to tell some form of story. Damnation Alley has good action, a few scary moments, some credible if not always successful special effects, a solid cast, and yet it falls short of being anywhere near a definitive post-apocalyptic story.
It's not good. The best we got.
Damnation Alley ends up as a series of vignettes that don't really build to anything. It's an enjoyable enough film, but rather shallow, like a scuba diver in a wading pool who's decided that they found their niche in life. I mean, turn your brain off. Well, I'll just assume that the equipment is there to do that, and watch the giant scorpions, hordes of cockroaches, and inbred wannabe lovers. Damnation Alley was a film that seemed like it was a good idea at the time, but didn't quite turn out the way everybody involved was expecting. Damnation Alley was at first a 1967 novella by Roger Zelazny that he later expanded into an action-adventure-focused novel in 1969. By the time a film version was nearing production in the mid-70s, the film script had moved away from being a direct translation of the book into something more possible on the sort of budget and technology that was available.
You ought to put up a sign saying, Damnation Alley.
Various directors were approached before eventually veteran director Jack Smight was hired. He'd been around for a while working in both film and television. He had to shoot the ending of his one episode of Columbo with a stand-in when the star was playing hard to get in his negotiations with the studio. Smight did his job and then just moved on with a minimum of fuss. He had recently helmed mid-70s hits Airport 1975 and Midway, both films with special effects and action.
But the screens show it to be the path of least resistance.
With a revolving door of titles eventually settling back on Damnation Alley, the film began production with a budget of just over $7 million, which seemed to be in the ballpark for a science fiction movie at the time. Much of the film was shot in various locations in California, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, which gave the film a relatively expansive feel. Damnation Alley did not have an easy production, with Smight's original cut clocking in at over 2 hours, and the studio took over the task of editing the film down to a tight 90 minutes.
You don't feel like admitting you're wrong, do you, Major?
Perry's dead. It doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong. It means Perry's dead.
Almost anything resembling character development has been excised, including much of the conflict between Tanner and Denton, and a love triangle between them and Janice. I dig Auntie Beryl was once involved in a love triangle with two rival pub owners, which proved to be quite awkward. The only upside to the situation was, for a time, her cupboards were always stocked with beer nuts and pretzels.
Well, that's a mighty subtle difference.
Damnation Alley was originally hoped to be a 1976 release, but in the background, Fox seemed to be feeling that that little space opera film of theirs might actually turn out to be a bit better than Damnation Alley. Director Smight believed money had been diverted from his budget to help get Star Wars over the line. A last-minute idea to make the sky look radioactive for most of the film added complications when hundreds of shots that were not planned as effect shots now had effects added to give the sky an unnatural irradiated look, rather like the passengers you see at the departure lounge at London's Stansted Airport. Another casualty of the film's budget, large chunks of action, particularly of missile launches and the destruction of the underground base, were depicted through stock footage.
Oh, this thing's got some juice in the bottom end, don't it?
She will go.
Here's a film that stars the future leads of Airwolf and the A-Team, though at no point does Vincent blow up a helicopter, nor does George Peppard ever express affection for schemes coalescing.
Ah, you just watch my style, son.
Jan Michael Vincent was the nominal star of the film as Jake Tanner, where it's a perfect role for him, though he did live up to his off-screen reputation as a hellraiser, which did help contribute to the shoot being not all that easy. Tanner started off as a slightly more casual Air Force officer who resigns after the nuclear war and ends up roving around on a motorbike as a scavenger. Then he joins up with his former office nemesis, Sam Denton, and tends to play nice for most of what we see in the released version of the film. George Peppard was a movie star, now moving into playing character parts. Denton is not so easygoing, though he does loosen up towards the end of the film, where he's less exasperated with Tanner. Janice was played by Dominque Sanda, a French actress who worked extensively in European films, though in the mid-70s did appear in a few English-language movies. Jackie Earle Haley was a familiar child star in the mid-70s in television and features, though much later on he'd play iconic characters such as Rorschach in Watchmen and Freddy Krueger. Paul Winfield was in many productions, though for this channel, he appeared in a couple of iconic Star Trek productions.
It has a cruising speed of 60 miles an hour. It has 3 separate drive sources. You can can operate with either the front or rear wheels out of action.
The Landmaster is a pretty cool vehicle with its unique rotating tri-wheel assembly and offensive capabilities such as a machine gun and missiles. The only offensive capabilities my vehicle has is a bright orange vinyl wrap.
How's it do on gas?
In earlier scenes there are actually 2 Landmasters, but only one full-size prop was built. So in some shots, special effects were used to make us see double. Either that or too much gin.
I don't know. It could do it all by itself.
Futuristic all-terrain vehicles, RVs, motorhomes seem to be something that sci-fi producers of the 70s thought were great, judging by their proliferation. In the film, the Landmaster can float, which not every weird-looking truck can do, and it can withstand punishment from radiation and various storms.
Nothing good ever just happens by itself, no matter how much you want it to. You gotta make it.
The film's visual effects are a mix of not bad, not great, not terrible, not great, just passable but could do better. I mean, these aren't just my words, I am quoting from my high school report cards. The mutated scorpions were originally meant to be full-size props, but instead were real scorpions matted into the action. The cockroaches were a mix of real creepy crawlies and props, where swarms of them were sometimes depicted with fake and real cockroaches sitting on a mat pulled along on a wire. I'll be back in a sec, I'm just popping down the shops to get 50 roach bombs, because after seeing this movie, you can never have too many roach bombs.
Armor-plated cockroaches.
I suppose there's a restaurant down there?
There are a few less than convincing shots of a model Landmaster, which are thankfully brief. The irradiated skies, while a little gimmicky, do add a nice touch of visual flair to the film. I mean, they are awfully pretty skies.
Still got food and drink, fireworks in the sky.
Though having said all of this, if you had seen the film before you saw Star Wars, you probably would have thought the effects were quite good. After Star Wars, they looked a little like Grandpa Mel's baseball cap, a bit old hat.
You just hang on to the wheel, make it look good.
Damnation Alley has a decent score from Jerry Goldsmith, but there was nothing that could save the film at the box office, where it did not do all that well. It was eventually released months after Star Wars, but before Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 2 films that instantly made most other effects films look obsolete. Damnation Alley did not do well at the box office, and while it has its fans, it's mainly faded into obscurity. Despite poring over the many films and television series of the time, I personally was not even aware that this film existed until quite recently, but I was fascinated to finally be able to sit down and watch it. It seems very familiar, where you can see it as a sort of prototype for things like Mad Max and the plethora of low-budget clones in the wake of that film that inhabited video libraries in the 80s and 90s, as well as comics and video games, where it obviously inspired various designers of Fallout video games.
What's heritage?
That's what people leave other people after they find out it don't work.
I would avoid alternate cuts, like a possibly made-up, heavily edited version for television in some markets where anything remotely offensive or scary was removed. So if you see a TV listing for Tarnation Alley, move.
Tarnation Alley, who named it that?
Damnation Alley is a good idea, a bit of fun, a premise that could have made for a very interesting television series, but it's not an amazing film. It's okay. Though, I must confess that I am now looking at getting one of those Landmaster model kits. It's for science, you understand? If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.